Adama, why is there so much anger in your eyes every time you look at me? Because every smile on your face reminds me of everything you took from me. Took from you, Adama? I sacrificed my whole life for you. No, you sacrificed nothing. You stole my son and made him forget the woman who gave him life. Your son? He has always known the truth. I never stopped him from loving you. Then why does he honor you? Why does he protect you? Why does everyone call you his mother while I stand like a stranger? Because love cannot be forced. It is earned through sacrifice. Enough! Stop pretending to be innocent! You knew exactly what you were doing all these years! Adama, listen to yourself. Jealousy is changing you into someone I no longer recognize. Please don't let hatred destroy the little family we have left. Hatred. No, this is justice. Justice? What are you talking about? Very soon, everyone will know who Ifechukwu's real mother is. Adama, please, don't do something you'll regret for the rest of your life. By the time you understand, it will already be too late.
In the peaceful village of Umweze, where the mornings began with the songs of birds, the soft crowing of cocks, and the distant voices of women sweeping their compounds, there stood a modest family home built with beautiful round huts covered with neat thatch roofs that shone softly under the sun. The compound was not large and it was not the richest in the village, but it was always clean, warm, and full of life. There were palm trees standing proudly at the edge of the land, a small yam barn behind one of the huts, and patches of vegetables carefully tended by the woman of the house. In that compound lived Mazi Ibe, his wife Ezine, and their two daughters, Olaedo and Adama. Mazi Ibe was not a wealthy man, but he was known in Umweze as an honest and gentle man who worked hard with his hands and never took what belonged to another person. Ezine, his wife, was a quiet woman with a strong heart and soft eyes. She carried herself with grace and taught her daughters to be respectful, hardworking, and humble. The family did not have much, but in their little home there was peace. In the evenings, Ezine would sit with her daughters in the open courtyard while the last light of the sun rested on the red earth, and she would speak to them about patience, dignity, and the kind of woman each of them should become. Olaedo, the elder daughter, always listened with deep attention. She was calm, thoughtful, and naturally caring. Even as a young girl, she had a way of watching others with concern, as though she could feel their pain before they spoke. Adama, her younger sister, was lively, beautiful, and full of movement. She laughed easily, spoke quickly, and liked to be admired. Though the sisters were different in nature, they were close, and in those early years, their home was still held together by the steady love of their mother. But peace does not always stay where it is welcomed, and one season, sickness entered the compound like a thief that refused to leave. At first, Ezine complained of tiredness. She said her body felt heavy and her chest hurt. Mazibe thought perhaps it was only weakness from too much work, and Olaedo quickly began doing more in the house so her mother could rest. She fetched extra water, cleaned the kitchen area, pounded food, and cared for her younger sister without being asked. But the sickness did not go away. Days turned into weeks, and Ezine became thinner and weaker. Her voice lost its strength, and there were mornings when she could not rise from her mat. Herbal mixtures were prepared. Elders were consulted. Women from nearby compounds came to sit with her and encourage her. Mazibe walked from place to place looking for help, and the fear in his eyes grew greater with every passing day. One evening, as the sky grew dark and still, Olaedo sat near her mother's sleeping mat and held her hand. Ezine looked at her with tired eyes and said softly, "My daughter, you must be strong. No matter what happens, do not let this house scatter." Olaedo's heart trembled. "Mother, please do not speak like that," she said, her voice shaking. "You will get well. You must get well." Ezine gave a weak smile and then turned her eyes toward Adama, who sat crying quietly in a corner. "Take care of your sister," she whispered. "Take care of your father." Before dawn broke the next morning, Ezine died. The cry that rose from Mazibe's compound that day shook the quiet air of Umweze. Neighbors rushed in, women wailed, men stood with heavy faces. Adama threw herself to the ground, crying for her mother. Mazibe sat like a broken man, unable to understand how the woman who had filled his home with warmth was now lying still before him. But it was Olaedo who seemed to change the most in that moment. She cried, and her tears were many, but inside her pain, something in her became older. It was as if the burden of the house quietly moved from her mother's shoulders to hers. After the burial, the compound did not feel the same again. The courtyard still stood, the huts still stood, the trees still moved with the wind, but the spirit of the place had changed. Silence entered the spaces where her mother's voice used to rest. Mazibe tried to carry on, but grief made him slow. Sometimes he would sit in front of his hut in the evening and stare into the distance for a very long time without saying a word. Adama missed her mother deeply, but she was still young enough to run from pain when laughter or distraction came near. Olaedo, however, stepped fully into duty. She awoke before sunrise to sweep the compound, fetch water, prepare food, clean the cooking area, wash clothes, and make sure her father and sister lacked nothing. She no longer waited to be told what to do. She watched everything. She carried everything. And though she was still just a young girl growing into womanhood, she began to move through the house like one who had become both daughter and mother at the same time. As the years passed, both sisters grew into beautiful young women. In the simple village learning place, they were taught discipline, moral lessons, household training, and the customs of their people. They did not wear uniforms or city clothes. They dressed in wrappers and simple traditional attire with beads and cloth suited to the old life around them. When they walked to the stream or the market with other maidens, people noticed them. Adama was especially admired. She had a bright face, lively eyes, and the kind of beauty that quickly drew attention. Her laughter made people turn. Her beauty made people speak. When she passed, young men found reasons to linger. Olaedo was also beautiful, but hers was the kind of beauty people noticed more slowly. It was quiet. It sat in the gentleness of her face, the calmness of her speech, and the dignity of the way she carried herself. Those who looked closely saw it, but in a world where many looked first at brightness and outward charm, Adama was often the one seen first. It did not seem to trouble Olaedo. She moved through her days with grace and did her duties without complaint. But Mazibe noticed the difference. He saw how young men found their way toward Adama while hardly asking after the elder daughter, and though he said little, the thought stayed with him. Then trouble came in a form none of them had prepared for. Adama began to change. At first, it was small things. She grew unusually quiet at certain times. She avoided some places and some people. She would sit alone for long stretches, looking afraid. And when Olaedo asked her what was wrong, she would quickly say, "Nothing." Her appetite changed. Some mornings she could not eat. Other times she ran outside suddenly as though she felt sick. Olaedo watched carefully. One afternoon, as they were alone in the compound washing calabashes, Olaedo looked at her sister for a long moment and then said, "Adama, Tell me the truth. What is wrong with you? Adama avoided her eyes. Nothing is wrong with me, she replied too quickly. Olaedo set down the calabash in her hand. Do not lie to me. You are my sister. I have watched you for days. Something is wrong. Adama's lips trembled. Please leave me alone. I cannot leave you alone when I can see fear all over your face, Olaedo said gently. What happened? For a few seconds, Adama kept silent, and then tears rushed to her eyes. She turned away and covered her face. I am finished, she cried. I am finished. Olaedo stood still, her heart beating faster. She moved closer and held her sister's arm. Finished how? Speak to me. Adama broke down completely. Between sobs and shame, the truth came out. She was pregnant. The words seemed to hang in the air long after she said them. Olaedo stared at her sister with shock, pain, and pity all at once. She sat down slowly on a low wooden stool and pressed her hand against her chest. For a long moment, she said nothing. At last, she asked in a low voice, Does father know? Adama shook her head quickly. No, I cannot tell him. He will hate me. He will be ashamed of me. What will people say? What will happen to me? Olaedo's first feeling was deep sorrow, not only for the disgrace that would come upon the family, but for the fear eating her sister alive. Crying will not remove it now, she said softly. The truth is already here. Hiding it will only make the shame worse. Adama fell to her knees. Please do not tell him. Please, Olaedo, do not tell father. Olaedo looked down at her younger sister and felt the weight of their late mother's words inside her heart. Take care of your sister. Take care of your father. She closed her eyes briefly, fighting her own pain. I will not expose you, she said at last, but you must speak. Father must hear it from you, not from outside people. If your stomach grows and he hears from others, the wound will be worse. Adama cried harder. I am afraid. I know, Olaedo answered, kneeling to hold her shoulders. I know you are afraid, but fear does not change truth. We will tell him together. That evening, after Mazibe had returned home and eaten a little, Olaedo sat near him in the courtyard while Adama stood trembling nearby. The firelight moved softly across their faces. Mazibe looked from one daughter to the other and sensed at once that something was wrong. He asked, What is it? Why do both of you look like this? Adama could not speak. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Her eyes filled with tears. Olaedo reached for her hand. Father, she began carefully, there is something Adama needs to tell you. Mazibe's face tightened. He turned toward his younger daughter. Speak. Adama dropped to the ground and burst into tears. Father, forgive me, she cried. Forgive me, I have done wrong. Mazibe's expression changed slowly from confusion to dread. What wrong? He asked in a harder voice. Adama bowed her head until it almost touched the ground. I am with child. The old man froze. For some moment, the compound was silent except for Adama's crying. He looked at Olaedo as though hoping she would deny it, but Olaedo lowered her eyes. Mazibe stood up and began to pace. No, he said under his breath. No, no. Then he turned sharply. Who did this? Adama wept harder. He is gone, she said. He is not here. Mazibe let out a bitter cry of pain and anger. So this is what my house has become. After all the care, after all the warnings, after all the shame your mother never wanted for this family. He struck his walking stick against the ground in frustration, but he did not touch her daughter. His face was full of disappointment and hurt. Adama kept begging, Father, forgive me. Please forgive me. Olaedo remained quiet, allowing his pain to breathe. After some time, Mazibe sank back onto his stool, like a tired man. Will I kill you now? He asked bitterly. Will that remove what is already done? His voice broke at the end, and it was that brokenness more than his anger that made both girls cry. From that night, the truth remained in the house like a heavy object none of them could move. In the weeks that followed, Adama's stomach slowly began to show. Some people in the village guessed, Others whispered. Shame settled over the compound, but life still had to continue. Olaedo stood even more firmly beside her sister, helping her through the sickness and discomfort of pregnancy. She accompanied her to the stream at quiet hours to avoid too many eyes. She defended her when cruel words were spoken. She took on more of the housework so Adama could rest. In all of it, she did not once say, "You brought this upon yourself." She only endured with her. Yet there was another pain waiting. Even with the pregnancy becoming obvious, men still came to ask for Adama's hand in marriage. The first time it happened, after the truth came out, Mazi Ibe looked almost embarrassed with anger. A group of elders came on behalf of a suitor, and after welcoming them properly, he said plainly, "The girl you have come for is carrying a child. I will not hide truth from you." The men exchanged glances. One of them cleared his throat and said, "Our son has heard." Mazi Ibe frowned. "He has heard and yet he still asks for her?" "Yes," the man replied. "He says he wants Adama." Mazi Ibe looked toward the inner part of the compound, where Olaedo was passing quietly with a basket. "I have an elder daughter," he said, motioning toward her. "She is of good character, hardworking, respectful, and free of this trouble. Why not ask for her instead?" But the answer came without hesitation. "It is Adama our son wants." The words stung, though nobody spoke of the sting. After the visitors left, Mazi Ibe sat in silence. Olaedo continued her chores as if nothing had happened. But later that night, as she spread mats for sleep, Adama looked at her with guilt. "I am sorry," she whispered. Olaedo paused, and then forced a small smile that did not reach her eyes. "Sleep," she said. "Tomorrow will come, whether we cry or not." But it did not happen only once. Again and again, different men came. Again and again, Adama was the one they wanted. Again and again, when Mazi Ibe suggested the elder daughter, the answer was no. They did not want Olaedo. They wanted Adama. The pain of that repeated rejection did not burst out in Olaedo, but it buried itself quietly in places where no one could see. Still, she remained gentle. Still, she remained useful. Still, she remained the steady one in the house. At last, the months of waiting ended, and Adama went into labor. It was a long, difficult day. Women from neighboring compounds came to assist. Olaedo stayed near, bringing water, cloths, and anything needed. Adama screamed and cried, calling for her mother, though the woman was no longer alive to answer. Mazi Ibe paced outside like a restless shadow, his hands shaking with worry. When at last the cry of a newborn filled the air, relief swept through the compound. One of the women stepped out carrying a baby boy wrapped in cloth and announced that mother and child had survived. Mazi Ibe's face softened with tears. Olaedo rushed inside and found her sister exhausted, sweaty and weak, with the baby beside her. She looked down at the child, and something in her heart melted at once. He was small, warm and innocent, untouched by the shame and pain that had surrounded his coming. "He is beautiful," she whispered. Adama looked at the baby with a tired smile. "His name will be Ifechukwu." From that day, the child became a light in the house. Mazi beloved him deeply. He would carry him in the mornings and speak to him softly. Olaedo cared for him with devotion, often waking at night to soothe him when Adama was tired. The child's presence softened some of the sorrow that had lived in the compound since Ezine died. But while the baby grew, life kept moving. Not long after the birth of the child, another suitor came, this time a man named Uche from the village of Amaokwe. His people arrived with seriousness and respect. Uche was considered stable, mature, and ready to marry. As discussions began, one truth quickly rose like a wall between them. Uche did not want another man's child in his household. He wanted Adama, but the baby was not welcome. Mazibe argued at first. He said the child is her blood. How will a mother throw away her own son? But the messengers made the matter plain. Our son will marry her, but he will not raise another man's child. For days, tension filled the compound. Adama became restless again, caught between her desire for marriage and the child she had born. She knew chances like this did not come often, especially for a woman whose shame was already known. Uche's interest felt like escape, security, and a new beginning. Yet Ifechukwu stood in her path, small and innocent, unable to speak for himself. One evening, after another long talk with their father about the marriage, Mazibe rose and went into his hut, tired and troubled. The night air was cool and the moonlight lay across the courtyard. Olaedo sat near the doorway, rocking Ifechukwu gently in her arms. Adama stood watching her for a long moment, her face full of struggle. Then slowly, she stepped forward and dropped to her knees before her elder sister. Olaedo looked up in shock. "What are you doing?" she asked. Adama grabbed the edge of her wrapper and began to cry. "Please," she said, "please do not refuse me." Olaedo's heart tightened. "Refuse you what?" Adama clasped her hands together like a beggar. "Take him," she said, looking at the sleeping child. "Take my son. Raise him for me." Olaedo stared at her, unable to speak at first. "What are you saying?" Adama wept bitterly. "Uche will not accept him. If I insist, I may lose this marriage. Father loves the child and I know he cannot throw him away. Please, Olaedo, help me. Keep him. Raise him. Let him stay here. Let him be yours in this house." Olaedo held the child tighter, as if the request itself had made her afraid for him. "Adama, this is your son. I know he is my son, but what can I do? Should I remain here forever? Should I lose my life because of one mistake? Please, you have always helped me. Help me again. I will not forget it. I swear, I will never forget it." Tears filled Olaedo's eyes. She looked down at little Ifechukwu sleeping peacefully, unaware that the future of his life was being laid before him under the moon. "Do you know what you are asking of me?" she asked in a broken voice. "Do you know what this will mean?" Adama nodded through tears. I know, but you are the only one I have. You are the only one who can do this." Olaedo's mind raced. She thought of all the days she had already spent caring for the child. She thought of her dead mother. She thought of her father's tired face. She thought of her sister kneeling in front of her, desperate to be saved from the weight of her own choices. Above all, she thought of the baby himself. What would become of him if no one stood fully for him? Her eyes closed for a moment, and when she opened them, they were full of pain and surrender. "Stand up," she said softly. Adama looked at her with wet, hopeful eyes. "Does that mean yes?" Olaedo swallowed hard. "I will raise him. I will care for him as if he came from my own body. I will not let him suffer." Adama let out a cry of relief and bent forward holding her sister's knees. "May God bless you. May God bless you. I knew you would not abandon me." But Olaedo's tears now slipped down her cheeks. "Do not thank me as if this thing is small. What you are asking me to carry is not small." Adama wiped her face quickly. I know, but I will remember your kindness." Olaedo looked away into the darkness, as though somewhere beyond it she could already see the shape of the sacrifice before her. She looked down again at the child in her arms and kissed his forehead gently. In that quiet moment, without drums, without ceremony, and without anyone in the village knowing, the course of her life changed forever. She did not know how much the decision would cost her. She did not know what doors would close because of it. She did not know what sorrow and what love were both wrapped inside that one promise, but she made it with a full heart. And in the stillness of that night, while the moon watched over the beautiful huts of Umweze and the wind moved softly through the palm trees, Olaedo accepted a burden that was never truly hers, and yet she carried it with the pure love of one who had already chosen sacrifice over self. The morning Adama was to leave for Amaokwe as Uche's wife was bright and calm, but there was no real peace in Olaedo's heart. The compound in Umweze was busy from early dawn. Women moved in and out with small bundles and farewell gifts. Men sat in front of the huts, speaking in low voices. Adama was dressed like a new bride, and though there was joy on her face, there was also something else hiding beneath it, something restless and uncertain. Little Ifechuko was still too small to understand what was happening. He slept in Olaedo's arms for most of the morning, his tiny body warm against her chest, his fingers sometimes opening and closing in sleep. Mazibe moved slowly that day, pretending to focus on guests and custom, but his eyes often returned to the child. He knew what had been agreed in the quiet of the night. He knew that when Adama left that compound, she would leave a part of herself behind, and the burden of that part would rest fully on Olaedo. When it was finally time for Adama to go, there were tears and embraces. She knelt before her father, and he placed his hand on her head and blessed her, though his face was heavy. Then she turned to Olaedo. For a brief moment, the two sisters looked at each other, and no one around them understood the full meaning of that silence. Adama's eyes dropped to the child sleeping in Olaedo's arms. She touched his cheek lightly, and her lips trembled. "Take care of him," she whispered. Olaedo held the child tighter. "Go in peace," she replied. Adama nodded quickly, as if she could not bear to hear more, and then she turned away. She climbed into the group that would lead her toward her husband's village, and before long, the sound of footsteps and voices faded along the red earth path. When she was gone, a strange stillness settled in the compound. Olaedo stood in the courtyard with Ifechuku in her arms and felt not like a sister helping for a while, but like a woman whose life had just been tied forever to a child who did not know the story of his own beginning. From that day, the baby truly became her world. She woke before sunrise to sweep the compound with him tied securely to her back. She cooked with him near her, bathed him with careful hands, sang him to sleep, and soothed him whenever he cried. If he fell ill, she stayed awake all night, feeling his forehead, fanning him, whispering soft words to him, while fear sat like a stone inside her chest. On days when he refused food, she knelt patiently beside him, touching his chin and saying, "My child, eat a little for me, only a little. You need strength." When he took even one small mouthful, her face would brighten with relief, as though the whole world had been restored. Mazibe watched all this and often felt both gratitude and pain. One evening, as Olaedo sat near the doorway crushing herbs for a mild fever the child had developed, Mazibe came to sit beside her and said quietly, "You have carried this child as if you gave birth to him yourself." Olaedo did not lift her eyes from her work. "He is in my hands now. How else should I carry him?" Mazibe sighed deeply. "Sometimes when I look at you, I remember your mother. The same spirit is in you." Olaedo paused for a moment and then continued crushing the herbs. "I only pray God gives me strength. That is all." As the months became years, Ifechuku grew under her care like a tree planted beside living water. He learned her scent, her voice, her footsteps, and the rhythm of her breathing. When he cried in the night, it was for her. When he woke in the morning, he searched for her face. When he began to speak, one of his first clear words was "mother," and he said it while reaching both hands toward Olaedo. She froze the first time she heard it. Her eyes filled with tears so quickly that she had to turn away and wipe them before lifting him. She held him close, her voice shaking as she said, "Yes, my son, I am here." Mazibe, who had been sitting nearby repairing a basket, lowered his hands and watched them in silence. He knew that the line between promise and reality had fully disappeared. Olaedo was no longer only raising the child. In every way that mattered, she had become her mother. The villagers saw it too. They saw her carrying him on her back to the stream, sitting him beside her in the market, cleaning his nose, correcting him gently when he was stubborn, and shielding him from danger with the fierce instinct of a parent. Those who did not know the deeper truth simply assumed he was hers. Those who knew said little, because what the eye saw each day was stronger than any old explanation. "That is Olaedo's son," people would say casually, and with time, the words settled into common belief. But while Ifechuku flourished, the cost of that truth slowly unfolded in Olaedo's life. Suitors who might once have shown interest no longer came. Some looked at her from a distance and assumed she had already borne a child. Others did not want to step into the confusion of her life. A few older women in the village would sometimes speak with pity when she passed. Such a good woman, one would say. See how she has tied herself down. Another would answer, not every woman can carry another person's burden like that. Olaedo had such things sometimes, but she kept moving. She never stood to explain herself. She never sat down to cry publicly over the future slipping from her hands. She simply continued. Her youth passed through hard work and care. Her body grew stronger from labor, but her heart learned the quiet pain of sacrifice. Meanwhile, in Amaokwe, Adama settled into the life of a wife. At first, she returned to Umueze often enough to keep some appearance of closeness. She would come with greetings from her husband's family, sit for a while in the courtyard, and look at Ifechukwu from a strange distance, sometimes with affection, sometimes with discomfort. The child, still little, would greet her politely when prompted, but whenever he was upset or afraid, it was toward Olaedo that he ran. That truth always pricked something sharp inside Adama. One day, when Ifechukwu was about 4 years old, Adama came visiting and carried a small cloth bag of roasted groundnuts for him. "Come to me," she said with a forced smile, holding out her hand. The boy looked at her, then looked at Olaedo, and instead of going, he leaned against Olaedo's wrapper and hid part of his face. Adama's expression changed for a brief second before she masked it. "He is shy," she said. Olaedo gently pushed the child forward. "Greet your aunt," she told him softly. He bent his head and greeted her, then ran back to Olaedo's side. The word aunt hung in the air after he said it, and Adama did not miss it. Later, when the child had gone off to play and Mazibe was resting inside, Adama spoke in a low voice. "He calls me aunt now." Olaedo, who was folding washed cloths, paused. "He calls what he knows," she said quietly. "He is still young." Adama gave a short, bitter laugh that she quickly swallowed. "Young, yes, but children know who stays with them." Olaedo turned to look at her sister, but Adama looked away and changed the subject. Not long after, Adama had her first daughter, Osinachi. Then, some years later, she had another daughter, Chisom. With each new child and each new duty in her husband's house, she drifted further from the son she had left behind. Her visits became fewer, her concern became lighter. Sometimes she sent messages, sometimes she sent small things, but in truth, her heart had rearranged itself around the life she had chosen, while Olaedo's own heart remained fixed on the boy she had received into her arms that moonlit night. Ifechukwu grew into a lively, intelligent child. He followed Mazibe around the compound, asking questions about everything. He liked to sit near the old man in the evening and listen to stories about honesty, labor, and the dignity of a man's name. A man must stand upright even when no one is watching. If your hands are clean, your sleep will be sweet. The boy would nod seriously, though his feet still swung above the ground from the stool where he sat. Olaedo trained him with gentleness, but also with discipline. If he spoke rudely, she corrected him. If he was lazy, she gave him work. If he did well, she praised him with a smile that could fill his whole day with joy. She taught him respect for elders, care for the weak, and gratitude for little things. At night, when all was quiet, she sometimes sat by his sleeping mat and looked at his face in the dark. In those moments, she felt a kind of fullness and a kind of ache at the same time. She knew he was not from her womb, but every part of her life had been poured into him. She could not imagine her days without him. As he entered his early youth, his strength became clear. He was hardworking, quick to learn, and good with people and numbers. He could carry messages faithfully, remember instructions clearly, and show respect even when other boys his age grew careless. Mazibe began to think deeply about the boy's future. One evening after supper, he called Olaedo to sit with him under the fading light. Ifechukwu had gone to wash at the back of the compound. "This child is no longer a small boy," Mazibe said. "His hands must soon enter work that will shape his life." Olaedo nodded slowly. "I have been thinking the same. He must learn trade, the old man continued. He must not grow into a man without a path. I have heard good things about Chief Ikioha Inumuago. They say he's strict, but just. They say boys who serve him well do not regret it. Olaedo was silent for a while. The thought of Ifechuku leaving the compound struck her with sudden pain, but she hid it. If it is for his future, then it is right, she said at last. When they spoke to Ifechuku about apprenticeship, the young man listened carefully. Will I be far from home? He asked. Not so far that the road cannot be travelled, Mazibe answered. A man must leave his mother's side one day and face the world. Ifechuku turned toward Olaedo. Will you still come and see me? He asked, and there was something almost childlike in the question, despite his growing frame. Olaedo smiled, though her throat had tightened. Do you think I would forget you? She replied. Wherever you go, my heart will still know the road. He smiled then, reassured, and bowed his head in agreement. Arrangements were made, and after some time, Ifechuku was taken to Umuagu to begin his apprenticeship under Chief Ikeoha, a wealthy merchant whose compound was larger than any he had ever seen. There were storage huts full of palm oil jars, heaps of palm kernels, bundles of woven cloth, baskets of kola nuts, bleating goats tied under shade, and men moving in and out with the serious pace of those used to trade and responsibility. Chief Ikayoha himself was a broad-shouldered man with sharp eyes and a commanding voice. The first day, he looked Ifechuku over from head to toe and asked, Can you work? Ifechuku bowed respectfully. Yes, sir. Can you obey? Yes, sir. Can you keep your hands from what is not yours? Yes, sir. Chief Ikayoha stared at him a little longer and then said, Words are easy. Time will test you. Apprenticeship life was not soft. Ifechuku woke before dawn, cleaned store areas, helped count goods, followed older boys to the market, learnt prices, watched bargaining, carried loads, and stood for long hours in the sun and dust. Sometimes his body ached at night so badly that he lay awake staring into darkness, missing home with a deep heaviness he could not explain. But whenever discouragement rose, the thought of Olaedo's face steadied him. She did not fail her promise. True to her word, she visited him. Sometimes she came carrying food wrapped carefully in leaves, dried meat, fresh cloth, or small things she knew he liked. The road was not always easy, and she often had to save from little to make those journeys, but she came. The first time she visited, after he had been there some weeks, Ifechuku saw her from a distance near the entrance to Chief Ikeoha's compound and almost forgot himself. Mother, he called, rushing toward her before checking his steps and bowing respectfully because he was now in another man's house. Olaedo laughed softly, though her tears had risen in her eyes. Have you forgotten your training already? She teased. No, mother, he said, smiling. I only forgot my feet. Chief Ikeoha, watching from a short distance, noticed the warmth between them. Later, he said to one of his senior men, That woman loves that boy deeply. It shows. Olaedo would sit with Ifechuku in the shade when his duties allowed and ask him every fall, Are you eating well? Do they treat you fairly? Are you learning? Do you sleep enough? He would answer each question patiently, and sometimes he would lower his voice and confess, It is hard. Olaedo would hold his hand and say, What makes a man is often hard. Do not run from it. Endure and learn. One day you will stand on your own feet and all this will make sense. Those words stayed with him. Year after year he served faithfully. He made mistakes and learned from them. He became stronger, wiser, more disciplined. Chief Ikeoha began to trust him with greater responsibility. He was allowed to oversee smaller transactions, to travel short market distances with goods, to keep records under supervision, and to manage parts of the business that would never have been placed in careless hands. That boy is different, some people in the trading circle began to say. He listens. He does not steal. He does not talk too much. He learns. Back in Umwezi, time was also moving, and it was not moving gently for Mazibe. The old man began to slow. At first, it showed in small ways. He would pause while walking and press a hand against his back. He tired more easily after little work. Some mornings, he coughed long before speaking. Olaedo noticed it quickly. Father, rest, she would say. Let me do that. But age is a stubborn visitor. It does not leave when asked. As the seasons passed, his body bent more, his voice lost force, and sickness began to visit him often. Olaedo cared for him with the same faithfulness she had once shown her mother and still showed Ifechuku. She prepared herbs, fed him, helped him sit up, and sat beside him through long nights when sleep would not come. During one of Ifechuku's visits home from Umuagu, he was shocked by how much older Mazibe looked. Grandfather, what happened? He asked softly, kneeling beside him. Mazibe gave a weak smile. Time happened, he answered. It comes for all men. Ifechuku turned away for a moment, blinking back emotion. Later that evening, he sat outside with Olaedo and said, "He was stronger the last time I came." Olaedo looked toward the hut where Mazibe rested. "He is going," she said simply, and the pain in her voice was so deep that Ifechuku felt helpless. "Will he recover?" he asked. Olaedo was silent for some seconds before answering. "I do not know. I only know we must keep doing our part." The end came one quiet season when the air felt strangely still around the compound. Mazibe had grown too weak to stand on his own. He called for Olaedo one afternoon, and when she came and sat beside him, he looked at her for a long time. "You have carried more than your share in this life," he said in a thin voice. Tears filled her eyes immediately. "Do not speak like that, father." He raised one weak hand slightly. "Listen to me. You have been daughter, mother, and strength in this house. If I live with any peace, it is because of you." He then asked for Ifechuku, who had been sent for, and arrived before nightfall. The young man knelt by the sleeping mat, overcome with emotion. Mazibe placed his trembling hand on his head. "Do not forget the woman who raised you," he said. "Do not let her labor become empty." Ifechuku's voice broke as he answered, "I will never forget, grandfather." Mazibe nodded faintly, and before another dawn fully broke, he died. Grief entered the compound once again, heavy and merciless. Olaedo wept not like a child now, but like a woman losing the last person who remembered her before sacrifice changed her life. Ifechuku mourned deeply too. Through the burial and the days after, he stayed close to Olaedo, helping where he could, watching the lonely silence settle over the compound now that Mazibe was gone. Before returning to Umuagu, he held her hand and said, "Mother, I do not want to leave you alone." Olaedo, though broken, answered with steadiness, "You must finish what you started. If you stop now, all his hope and all our labor will be wounded. Go and finish well. That will comfort me more than anything else." He bowed his head, tears filling his eyes. "I will make you proud." "You already do," she said, touching his face. "Now go and become the man your grandfather believed you could be." After Mazibe's death, Olaedo's life in Umueze became even lonelier, but she did not allow loneliness to turn her bitter. She kept the compound clean, managed what little they had, and continued her visits to Umuago whenever she could. Each time Ifeinchuku saw her, he felt renewed. Each time Chief Ikeoha observed their bond, his respect for both of them deepened. 7 full years passed in this way. By the end of that time, Ifeinchuku was no longer the uncertain boy who had arrived holding homesickness in his chest. He had become a disciplined, capable young man with clear eyes, steady habits, and a deep understanding of trade. Chief Ikeoha saw this clearly and chose to settle him well. The day of his settlement was one of joy and honor. Other traders, apprentices, workers, and visitors gathered to witness it. Goods were counted, money was given, items for trade were placed before him. Chief Ikeoha spoke openly before those present. "This young man served with honesty. He did not steal from me. He did not bring me shame. He worked, he learned, and he endured. Today, I release him with blessing." Ifeinchuku bowed deeply, emotion filling his face. "You have been like a father to me in trade. I will not forget your hand in my life." Chief Ikeoha nodded. "Do not only speak well, live well." With that settlement, Ifeinchuku stepped fully into manhood and business. He began humbly but wisely, using all he had learned. He traded first across familiar routes, then extended into wider circles. He bought carefully, sold carefully, saved carefully, and kept his word. People noticed him. They found him trustworthy. They found him calm under pressure and fair in dealings. Before long, his name began to rise in Obinagu, where he expanded his business and established himself strongly. Wealth came, not all at once, but steadily, as the fruit of discipline and clean labor. He remembered every hard day of apprenticeship, every journey Olaedo made to see him, every word of Mazibe, and every sacrifice that had formed him. As his prosperity increased, the first person he turned toward with full gratitude was Olaedo. He returned to Umueze not as a poor apprentice anymore, but as a young man able to change the condition of the woman who had emptied herself for him. One afternoon, he arrived in the compound with workers, plants, and materials. Olaedo stood staring in confusion as men began measuring parts of the land. "What is all this?" she asked. Ifeanyichukwu smiled. "You have lived long enough in struggle. It is time your life changes." She shook her head slowly, almost unable to believe him. "My son, what are you doing?" He took her hands in his. "What I should have done the very day I had strength. I am building you a proper house." Tears sprang to her eyes immediately. "A house?" "Yes," he said. "A fine one, strong, beautiful, and worthy of you." Olaedo tried to speak, but emotion closed her throat. She only shook her head as tears fell. "I do not need all this," she whispered. "You do," he answered gently. "If anyone in this world deserves comfort from my hand, it is you." The house he built for her was beautiful, one that made the villagers stop and look with admiration. It stood proudly within the compound, well crafted and strong, far better than what she had ever imagined for herself. But he did not stop there. He bought lands in her name so she would never feel insecure. He started business ventures for her, making sure she had steady sources of income and people to help manage them. He placed respect around her life the same way others would place ornaments around a queen. And in public, without shame or hesitation, he honored her as his mother. If people asked whose son he was, he did not speak in confusion. He spoke clearly. "I am Olaedo's son." If elders praised him and mentioned the woman who raised him, he would bow his head and say, "Everything good people see in me began in her." Whenever he came to Omoeze, he sat with her openly, consulted her, provided for her, and let the whole village see that the love she had sown in sacrifice had returned to her in honor. For the first time in many years, peace rested visibly on Olaedo's life. The burden she had carried in silence had not been empty after all, and as she stood in the doorway of the fine home her son had built, watched over the land he had bought, and saw the businesses he had started for her, her heart knew a deep and quiet joy, the joy of a woman whose sacrifice had not been forgotten. For a while after Ifeanyichukwu built a fine house for Olaedo, bought lands for her, started businesses in her name, and honored her openly before the people of Omoeze, it seemed as if a long season of pain had finally given way to rest in her life. The woman who had spent her youth carrying burdens that were never truly hers now woke each morning in a home built by the gratitude of the son she had raised with all her heart. People in the village spoke of her with respect. Older women pointed to her life and said that goodness might suffer for a time, but one day it would still shine. Men who had once hardly noticed her now greeted her with regard because Ifeanyichukwu's success had lifted her name. In the market square, in family meetings, and even during ordinary evening gatherings, her story was told with admiration. That young man did not forget the woman who raised him, people would say. He has done well. Whenever Ifeanyichukwu returned from Obinago or wherever his trade had taken him, he never failed to stop first in Omoeze and sit with Olaedo. He brought her cloths, food items, money, and gifts. But more than that, he brought her attention and honor. He did not behave like a man trying to perform duty from a distance. He behaved like a son whose heart rested naturally in his mother's presence. He would sit near her doorway at sunset and tell her about his journeys, his markets, the traders he had met, the bargains he had made, the problems he had solved, and the plans he had for the future. Olaedo would listen with quiet pride and sometimes laugh softly when he spoke with too much excitement. "Slow down," she would say. "You are speaking like a river in rainy season." He would laugh and answer, "It is because I want you to hear everything." Then she would smile and reply, "As long as you come back safely, that is what matters most to me." In those moments, peace settled around them so naturally that even strangers could see it. But far away in Amaokwe, the same peace that comforted Olaedo became the seed of burning bitterness in Adama's heart. At first, it did not show openly. She heard reports from visitors, from traders, from relatives, and from people passing between villages. They spoke of Ifechukwu's rise, of his wisdom in trade, of the fine house he had built for Olaedo, of the lands he had bought for her, and of the businesses he had established so that she would never lack anything. The first few times Adama heard such things, she forced a smile and acted as though she was pleased. "That is good," she would say. "He has always been a good boy." But each time the words were repeated, something darker grew inside her. The thoughts began to return to her again and again, when she was alone, when she was pounding food, when she lay beside her husband at night, when she sat watching her daughters, and when she heard others praise her elder sister. She would think, "I carried him. I brought him into this world. Why is it another woman who is eating the fruit of my womb?" At first, the thought came and went, but before long, it began to stay. And once it began to stay, it slowly changed the way she looked at everything. Whenever Ifechukwu sent money or support to her household, instead of gratitude, she now felt insult. If he sent wrappers for her and little gifts for her daughters, she looked at them and asked herself why such things should be small when the best was going to Olaedo. If he sent foodstuffs or helped with a need, she no longer saw kindness. She saw comparison. She saw the difference between being helped from a distance and being surrounded with honor. Her husband, Uche, noticed her change before she spoke of it clearly. There were evenings when she sat outside the hut after dark, staring into nothing while the children slept. He would come and sit beside her and ask, "What troubles you?" She would say nothing, but the word would carry no peace. One night, after she had been unusually silent all through supper, Uche set aside his cup and looked at her carefully. "This is no longer nothing. Your face has changed these past days. Your mind is somewhere else. Tell me what it is." Adama hesitated, but her bitterness had already become too full to hide completely. "People talk too much," she muttered. "What are they saying?" Uche asked. "They keep speaking of him. They keep speaking of Ifechukwu and all he's doing." Uche nodded. "And is that not good? The boy has become a man. He is prospering. It should bring joy." Adama let out a dry laugh. "Joy for who?" Uche frowned slightly. "What kind of question is that?" She turned toward him sharply. "I am his mother." Uche was silent for a moment. Then he said carefully, "You gave birth to him, yes, but the woman who raised him is the one he knows as mother. You knew this many years ago." The words stung her. "So I should just keep quiet while my own son pours everything at another woman's feet?" Uche's voice remained calm. "He does not neglect us. Has he not helped here too? Have you not sent things? Has he not shown respect?" Adama shook her head. "Not in the way he should. Not in the way he would if he truly knew who should stand first in his life." Uche sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Do not start this. The boy helps us as he can. He owes us nothing beyond kindness, and he has given kindness." But Adama was no longer hearing him. The more he tried to calm her, the more she felt that no one understood the fire inside her. Into that fire stepped Ugo, the one friend who knew exactly how to add dry wood to hidden flame. Ugo began visiting Amaokwe more often, always arriving with the face of a friend and the tongue of a destroyer. She would sit with Adama under the shade in the afternoon, lowering her voice as if sharing concern, while in truth she was feeding envy. "I passed through Umueze last market day," she said one afternoon, adjusting her wrapper and leaning closer. "If you see the house your sister is living in now, you would think she is a queen." Adama tried to look uninterested, but her fingers tightened around the basket she was weaving. "People have already told me," she said. Ugo clicked her tongue. "Told you? What they told you is small. You need to see it with your own eyes. Fine walls, good roofing, strong doors, and the way people greet her now, it is as if the whole village has forgotten who truly gave birth to that boy." Adama's face hardened. "Do not say what will pain me." But Ugo smiled the smile of someone who enjoyed seeing pain deepen. "I am only speaking truth. See how life is. You carried him in your womb, you suffered, you brought him into the world, yet your elder sister, who never even married, is the one eating the sweetness of his success. Tell me if that is fair." Adama lowered her eyes and said nothing. That silence encouraged Ugo. "And do you know what pains me most?" she continued. "People now speak as if Olaedo is his real mother. They say it openly. They praise her openly. They honor her openly. Is it not your blood that runs in that young man?" Adama's breathing changed, but she still said nothing. Ugo leaned closer still. "If I were you, I would not sit quietly while another person enjoys what belongs to me." Those visits continued. Each time Ugo came, she brought the same poison in different words. Sometimes she mocked softly. Sometimes she pretended to pity Adama. Sometimes she spoke as if she were protecting her rights. "Do not be foolish," she said another day. "The world does not reward women who stay blind. That woman has taken your place. Today it is gifts and houses. Tomorrow she will control everything in his life. You will be left with stories about how you once gave birth to him." Adama tried once to defend Olaedo weakly. She did raise him. She cared for him. But Ugo cut her off sharply. "Because you allowed her, and now she has tied him completely to herself. Open your eyes." After such conversations, Adama's mood would darken for days. She became short-tempered with her daughters and cold toward her husband. She began asking more often when Ifechukwu last sent anything, what exactly he sent, and whether what came was enough. When Osinachi and Chisom were old enough to notice such things, they also began hearing their mother's complaints. One evening, after Adama had finished talking bitterly about the latest story from Umueze, Osinachi asked, "Mother, if he is really your son, why does he not stay here with us more?" Adama's face tightened. "Because that woman has used her hands to hold him." Chisom, who was younger and quicker to absorb feelings than meaning, added, "Then she is not good." Adama did not correct her. Instead, she said, "Some people know how to take what belongs to others and still act innocent." From that day, the daughters too began to look at the matter through the eyes of grievance. If they visited Umueze, they watched Olaedo's comfort with resentment. They noticed the respect people gave her and returned home carrying stories that fed their mother's wounded pride. Yet, despite all this, Ifechukwu did not actually forget Adama's household. He still helped. He still greeted them respectfully when custom required it. He did not act with hatred. But because his deepest warmth belonged naturally to Olaedo, nothing he did for Adama was enough to satisfy the greed growing inside her. Gratitude had already died in her heart, and where gratitude dies, jealousy quickly takes the throne. Uche tried again and again to bring her back to reason. One night, after Ugo had left from another long visit, he said firmly, "I do not like the kind of things that woman tells you." Adama, who was already irritated, replied, "What is wrong with what she says?" Uche looked at him in disbelief. "Are you asking me that? Since she started coming often, your heart has not rested. You speak with bitterness. You look at every kindness as though it is an insult. That is not normal." Adama folded her arms. "So I should keep clapping for another woman while she enjoys my son?" Uche exhaled sharply. "Your son? Then tell me, where were you when he cried as a child? Where were you when he was sick? Where were you when he needed a mother every day? You made your choice long ago, and whether that choice was easy or hard, another person carried the burden." Adama's eyes flashed with anger. "You always defend her." "Because I am telling the truth," he answered. "The boy still helps us. Is that not enough? Must he now leave the woman who raised him and come kneel before you every morning?" Adama turned away from him with rage rising in her chest. "One day you will understand," she said coldly. Uche, seeing that reason was leaving her, shook his head and went inside. Ugo sensed the change clearly. The next time she visited, she lowered her voice even more and said, "I have been thinking about this matter deeply, and I do not believe it is ordinary." Adama looked up at once. "What do you mean?" Ugo let the silence stretch before answering. "No child gives that kind of loyalty unless something stronger is holding him. You say he helps you, but keeps his heart there. You say he honors that woman openly as mother. You say he never turns fully toward you no matter what you do. Does that sound ordinary to you? Adama's heartbeat quickened. Then what is it? Ugo leaned in as though sharing a forbidden secret. She has tied him. That is what I believe. Some women know how to bind the heart of a man or a child so that he can never see beyond them. You think this is just love? No, there is something behind it. Adama stared at her, half fearful, half eager. Can such a thing be true? Ugo nodded slowly. I have seen worse. If you leave this matter, you will grow old watching another woman enjoy what belongs to you. That sentence struck Adama like a blade. What can I do? She asked at last, her voice lower than before. Ugo sat back and pretended to think carefully, though she clearly came prepared for that very question. There is a man in Umonachi. People fear him, but they still go to him because they know his words do not fail. He sees what ordinary eyes cannot see. If anyone can cut this thing off, it is him. Adama felt fear rise inside her, but it was mixed now with desperate desire. Will you take me there? She asked. Ugo shook her head quickly. No, I cannot be seen in such a matter, but I can tell you the road. Then she gave the directions slowly and carefully, describing the path, the stream, the grove, and the hidden place where the feared Dibiamwori lived. For several days, Adama said nothing more, but the road to Umonachi began to live in her mind. She could not sleep well. Whenever she pictured Olaedo sitting peacefully in the house Ifechukwu built, wearing good wrappers and receiving open honor from him, her chest filled with heat. By the time she finally rose one morning and told Uche she was going to see a sick relative, her heart had already crossed a line from envy into darkness. The journey to Umonachi unsettled her. The path grew quieter the deeper she went, and by the time she reached the grove where Dibiamwore lived, the air itself seemed heavy. His compound stood apart from others, surrounded by old trees and a silence that made ordinary sounds feel far away. When she entered and announced herself, a young attendant took her inside to wait. After some time, the Dibia appeared, an older man with piercing eyes and a voice that seemed to carry both mockery and warning. He sat before her and said, "You have walked far with trouble in your heart. Speak." Adama hesitated at first, but once she began, the bitterness poured out. She spoke of Ifechukwu, of Olaedo, of honor, of wealth, of houses, of lands, and how everyone now looked at her elder sister as the true mother. The more she spoke, the more the twisted shape of her jealousy showed clearly. Dibiamwore listened without interruption. When she finally finished, he asked quietly, "And what exactly do you want?" Adama swallowed. The room felt suddenly smaller, but the thought of turning back did not come with strength. It came only as a weak shadow. "I want my son back," she said. Dibia's eyes did not move. "That is not all." Adama's fingers tightened on her wrapper. "I want the hold she has on him to end." "That is not all," he repeated. Silence pressed on her, until at last she said the words plainly. "I want her gone." Dibiamwore leaned back and watched her carefully. "Gone how?" Adama's voice dropped. "Dead." Even after saying it, she did not pull the word back. Dibiamwore remained still for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you know what you are asking?" "Yes," she replied, though her throat had dried. "Do you know the price of blood? Do you know that the earth listens when one hand rises against innocent flesh? Do you know that a deed like this does not sleep quietly?" For the first time, a small tremor of fear touched Adama, but her jealousy quickly covered it again. "I am ready," she said. Dibia's voice became firmer. "No one is truly ready for evil. They only think they are. Once it begins to answer, it does not ask whether your children are innocent or whether your nights will still be peaceful. Every deed calls something. Every deed returns with something." Adama lifted her chin stubbornly. "I have already said what I want. I am tired of watching another woman eat what belongs to me." Dibiamwore gave a cold smile that held no kindness. Then keep that same boldness when the thing begins to speak back. He asked her some questions, made preparations, chanted over objects she did not fully understand, and handed her what she would use. There is no need for noise. Do what must be done with calm hands. Once the road opens, it cannot be closed by tears. Adama nodded and took what he gave her. As she left Umonachi, her heart beat hard, but she still did not turn back. On the way home, she tried not to think of Olaedo's face. She tried not to remember how her elder sister had once stood beside her in shame, how she had raised Ifechukwu, and how she had never spoken bitterly of the life she lost. Every time such memories attempted to rise, Adama pressed them down and fed herself only with the thought that she was correcting a wrong. She reached Amokwe before nightfall and hid what the Dibia had given her. For some days she waited, pretending to live normally, while her mind circled like a hawk over one terrible decision. Then, one morning, she rose earlier than usual, prepared food carefully, and moved through the kitchen area with a steady face that hid the violence in her heart. No one watching her would have guessed what she intended. When the meal was done, she wrapped it neatly and announced that she was going to visit her sister in Umueze. Uche, who had no reason to suspect such darkness, only nodded and said, "Greet them when you get there." Adama answered, "I will." The road to Umueze seemed both familiar and strange that day. When she entered the village and approached Olaedo's compound, she saw the fine house Ifechukwu had built, standing with quiet pride. The sight hardened her again. Olaedo was outside when she arrived, sorting from items with the help of a young girl who assisted in one of the small businesses Ifechukwu had started for her. The moment she saw Adama, her face lit with genuine joy. "Adama," she exclaimed, rising at once. "You came without sending word?" She moved forward warmly and took her sister's hands. "You are welcome. Come in." There was no suspicion in her voice, no caution in her face, only open gladness at seeing her younger sister. That simple innocence should have broken Adama's resolve, but instead, it only made her feel a twisted urgency, as though she must complete the deed before her conscience woke fully. "I was passing nearby," she lied. "I thought I should come and see you." Olaedo smiled. "That is a good thought. You hardly come these days. Sit down. Let me bring water." Adama sat, while Olaedo moved about the house with natural hospitality. She brought water, asked about Uche, asked about the girls, asked about life in Amaokwe, and listened with soft concern to every answer. "You look tired," Olaedo said kindly, after studying her face. "Have you been resting well?" Adama forced a small laugh. "Who rests well in a family house?" Olaedo nodded with sympathy. "That is true." After a while, Adama lifted the wrapped food and said, "I brought this for you. I prepared it myself." Olaedo's face brightened even more. "You brought food for me?" she said, with delighted surprise. "Then today is truly special." She took it from her sister and opened it with the simple pleasure of someone who still believed love could come to her without hidden edges. "You still remember how I like it?" "Why would I not remember?" Adama replied, and the lie tasted bitter in her own mouth. Olaedo quickly arranged things and urged her sister to eat too, but Adama declined. "I already ate before leaving home." "Then I will not let what you brought grow cold," Olaedo answered cheerfully, and she sat and began to eat, praising the taste as she did. "You cooked this very well," she said. "Your hand has become stronger than before." Adama watched her closely and felt her insides knot. Olaedo went on speaking naturally between mouthfuls, asking after the girls, asking whether Uche was still doing well, and even mentioning Ifechukwu with warmth. "He was here not long ago," she said with a smile. "He asked after all of you. He never forgets. At those words, Adama almost flinched, but she kept her face under control. When the meal was finished, Olaedo wiped her hands and leaned back with contentment. "You have done well today. May good meet you on your road." Adama rose quickly, afraid to remain longer. "I should go before it gets late," she muttered. Olaedo stood too and embraced her gently. "Do not stay away too long again," she said. "This house is still your home." Adama could hardly hold the embrace. Her body felt cold. "I will come again," she said, though she knew the lie was now deeper than any she had spoken before. Then she turned and left. That evening, Umueze grew quiet as usual. The last sounds of daily work faded, cooking fires burnt low, and people withdrew into their homes. Olaedo, alone in her house, began to feel unwell. At first, she might have thought it was ordinary discomfort, but before long, the sickness deepened. There was no one close enough to understand what was truly happening. The night swallowed her struggle in silence, and before morning, Olaedo was dead. The cry that rose from the compound at dawn spread quickly through Mweze. Neighbors ran in, women wailed, men stood in disbelief. No one could understand it. She had not been known to be seriously ill. She had not looked like a woman about to die. The grief was immediate and deep because Olaedo was loved by many. "How can this be?" one woman cried. "Such a good woman," another said, beating her chest. Messengers were sent. News traveled. When word reached Ifechuku, it hit him like a blow from the sky. At first, he did not even believe what he had heard. "No," he said, rising sharply. "No, that cannot be true." But when the message was repeated with the sorrow of certainty, his strength seemed to leave his knees. Those around him watched in silence as he lowered himself slowly and covered his face. For some moments, he could not speak at all. Then grief tore through him. "My mother," he cried. "My mother." He returned to Mweze with urgency and pain burning through every step of the journey. The moment he entered the compound and saw mourning spread around the house he had built for her, his heart broke fully. He pushed through people until he reached the place where she lay and fell beside her in tears. "Mother, wake up," he said, like a child whose world had suddenly become unsafe. "Do not leave me like this. You cannot leave me like this." Those who heard him wept openly because the love between them had never been hidden. He touched her cold hand and remembered all at once the hands that had fed him, carried him, corrected him, defended him, and blessed him. The woman who had been the first face of comfort in his life now lay before him, unable to answer. No wealth in his hands could change that. No honor he had given her could call her back. His grief was not the grief of duty. It was the grief of a son losing the root of his life. Through the days that followed, he moved like a man carrying a mountain inside his chest. Yet, even in pain, he made sure she was buried with dignity. He did not allow her to be sent off carelessly. He arranged all that was needed, received mourners, listened to elders, and made sure the woman who lived with so much quiet sacrifice left the earth with honor. During the burial, many people spoke of her goodness. They spoke of her patience, her kindness, her labor, her humility, and the way she had raised Ifechuku as though heaven itself had placed her in her arms. Every word deepened his sorrow because each word was true. Adama mourned too in public. She cried where others could see. She lowered her head in sorrow. She moved like a grieving sister should move. No one suspected the blood hidden beneath her tears. No one imagined that the same woman crying near the grave had carried death into Olaedo's house with her own hands. The burial ended. The mourners slowly returned to their homes. The compound grew quieter, but Ifechuko's heart did not quiet. He remained shattered, and those who loved him feared for him. More than once, people found him sitting in silence where Olaedo used to sit, staring at nothing, as though trying to hear a voice that was no longer there. Still, after some time, he had to return to his life and his business, carrying grief with him like a wound under cloth. And in the hidden chambers of her heart, beneath all her outward sorrow, Adama held one secret thought close and dark. Now that Olaedo was gone, now that the one standing between her and her son had been removed, Ifechukwu would finally turn fully towards her. Adama waited for change after Olaedo's death, with the restless hope of a person who had committed evil and still expected reward from it. In the secret places of her heart, she believed time would now do what death had opened the way for. She believed that since Olaedo was no longer there, Ifechukwu would naturally draw nearer to her, that the distance that had always remained between them would finally disappear, and that all the love, attention, honor, and open devotion he had poured so freely upon her sister would now turn and settle on her own life. In the first days after the burial, while mourning still lay heavy over Umweze and the sound of grief had not yet fully faded, Adama kept watching Ifechukwu carefully whenever he spoke, whenever he sat, whenever he looked in her direction. She searched his face for signs of softening. She searched his words for some opening that would let her step into the place she had always envied. But nothing changed in the way she had imagined. Ifechukwu remained respectful in the manner of a well-brought-up man, but the warmth that belonged to a son was not there. He moved through those days like a wounded person carrying too much sorrow inside him. He spoke mostly to elders, to those handling the burial matters, and to the people who had come to honor the woman he knew as his mother. Whenever Adama tried to stand a little too close or speak with a tone that hinted at deeper connection, something in him quietly stepped back. It was not open rejection then, but it was not acceptance either. It was a distance that could be felt without being named. Adama noticed it at once, and though she tried to tell herself it was only grief and that time would correct it, a small fear began to move in her chest, like a hidden insect under cloth. When Ifechukwu finally returned to his life and business after the burial, he did not suddenly begin visiting Amalkwe with unusual frequency. He did not start carrying Adama and her household on his head. He did not begin calling for her advice or sitting in her compound as he used to sit in Olaedo's. He still sent help sometimes. If there was a need and he heard of it, he responded as a decent man would. But his support remained measured, distant, and without the deep tenderness Adama had hoped death would buy for her. The reality of that truth angered her more than she expected. It was as if she had poured innocent blood upon the ground, and yet the thing she killed for was still beyond her reach. At times, she would sit alone in the courtyard in Amalkwe and replay everything in her mind. She would remember Ugo's words. She would remember the road to Munachi. She would remember Dibi and Warrior's warning. But even then, instead of repentance, what first rose in her was frustration. She had not expected sorrow to remain so close after what she had done. She had expected relief, victory, and the sweet taste of possession. Instead, she found herself still looking across a gap that had not closed. Uche watched her in those months and noticed that though Olaedo was gone, peace had not returned to his wife's heart. If anything, she seemed more restless than before. One evening, while they sat outside after supper, and the moonlight lay pale on the packed earth of the compound, he said quietly, "Since your sister died, you have become more troubled, not less." Adama stiffened. "What kind of talk is that?" Uche looked at her steadily. "It is what I see. Before, you complained that the woman was standing in the way of your closeness with the boy. Now she is gone, yet your face still carries no rest." Adama turned away quickly. Grief changes people. Uche was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, it does. But the grief I see in you is not the grief of a sister. It looks like something else is haunting you. Those words pierced too closely, and Adama rose abruptly. "I am going inside," she muttered. Uche watched her go, troubled by something he could not yet name. Time passed, and in the midst of that uneasy season, life seemed to open another door before Adama's family. Her eldest daughter, Osinachi, had grown into a beautiful young woman. Unlike her mother, she had known a more stable upbringing. She had been raised in her father's home, learned her duties, and was considered by many to be respectful and suitable for marriage. A hard-working young man named Obina came to ask for her hand. Obina was from a good family and was already building a strong future for himself. He was known for diligence. He had farms that were doing well, trading ties that were growing, and a seriousness that made elders speak well of him. When the marriage discussions began, there was joy in Adama's house. For a time, that joy seemed to cover the shadows quietly. Preparations were made. People came and went. There was laughter again. Adama threw herself into the work of preparing her daughter for marriage, perhaps hoping that the happiness of Osinachi's new life would lift some of the heaviness pressing on her own spirit. The wedding was beautiful in the way village celebrations often were, full of movement, color, song, greetings, food, and the proud emotions of families watching their children step into new seasons. Osinachi left her father's compound and went into Obina's home with hope shining all over her face. Her husband loved her openly. He was kind to her, patient with her, and proud to call her his wife. In the first period of their marriage, everything looked blessed. Their home had laughter, Obina's work prospered, his yam barns were full, his farms yielded well, and his trading efforts brought good returns. When people spoke of them, they said, "These two have started well. Their path is bright." Even Adama, seeing her daughter so comfortable, found a small kind of satisfaction in it. But life has a way of letting hidden things sleep only until the right hour wakes them. When Osinachi became pregnant, the whole family rejoiced. Her husband was overjoyed and his people looked forward eagerly to the arrival of the child. During those months, Osinachi was treated with care. When the time came, she gave birth successfully to a healthy baby, and the joy in that house grew even greater. According to custom, it was now time for her mother to come and stay with her for a period, helping her through the first days after childbirth, caring for the baby, preparing special meals, bathing mother and child, and guiding the home through that delicate season. Adama went for this day with the dignity of a mother visiting her daughter in a season of blessing. She packed what was needed, received warm greetings when she arrived, and entered Obina's household with the confidence of one who expected to be welcomed. At first, everything seemed ordinary. She took charge of the little routines of care, instructed her daughter, carried the baby, and moved about the house as a mother should. But not long after she came, the strange turning began. At first, it was small enough to dismiss. One of Obina's expected payments did not come through. Then a transaction he had trusted began to go wrong. Then 2 laborers failed him on an important farm matter. Then goods he had sent toward a market were delayed in a way that caused a painful loss. He returned home one evening with his face dark and tired, and when Osinachi asked him what was wrong, he said only, "Something is not right." She thought he meant ordinary business trouble. "It will pass," she told him gently. "You have seen difficult days before." He nodded, but his eyes showed deeper worry than his words admitted. The next week, things worsened. A section of one of his farms suffered unexpected damage. Another agreement he had counted on collapsed in confusion. A debtor disappeared. The people he trusted most began behaving strangely. Instead of the steady rise he had known, it was as though an unseen hand was reaching into every place his effort touched and turning gain into loss. Obina tried at first to respond like a practical man. He adjusted. He worked harder. He traveled more. He looked for new openings. But each time he tried to stand in one place, the ground seemed to slip under him in another. Soon, money became tight in a way he had never known since he established himself. His mood changed. He ate less. He sat in thought for long periods. Even the way he held his child changed because now he held the baby with love mixed with fear for the future. Osinachi saw all this and began to feel troubled. One evening, after her mother had put the baby down to sleep, she sat with Obina and asked softly, "Is it very bad?" He exhaled slowly and rubbed his face. I do not understand it, he said. It is as if every place I turn now has become a place of loss. I work and lose, I invest and lose, I plan and something breaks. Osinachi reached for his hand. Maybe it is only a season. He looked at her tiredly. I want to believe that, but this kind of thing does not feel ordinary. In the weeks that followed, the house grew heavy. People who once praised Obina's progress now began to whisper that things were not as they looked before. Some of his business partners pulled back. Some began speaking carefully around him, as if misfortune could spread by association. Bills rose, resources shrank. What had once been easy became difficult. At last, in order to settle pressing needs and avoid public disgrace, he was forced to sell one small piece of land. The sale pained him deeply because he was not a careless man. He had built his life with discipline, and to begin selling land like a desperate person made him feel as though his own foundation was being cut from under him. Meanwhile, inside the same house, strange tension began to grow. Relatives of Obina watched quietly at first, but once the pattern of loss became harder to deny, they started speaking more boldly. Some asked whether all had truly been well before Osinachi entered the home. Others asked why such problems had only begun after childbirth and after Adama's arrival. One older woman from Obina's family said bluntly one day, "This is not ordinary hardship. There is a shadow in this house." Those words unsettled everyone. Obina did not want to think badly of his wife because he loved her genuinely. Osinachi herself was not quarrelsome or lazy. She had done nothing in her conduct to deserve blame. Yet, the timing of the strange downfall was hard to ignore. When he finally began seeking help outside ordinary effort, the answers he received frightened him. He visited one elder known for spiritual wisdom, then another, then another. Though their words differed in style, the message at the heart of them was similar. The trouble in his house was tied to the maternal line of his wife. Something hidden, dark and unresolved was following that side of the family. When he returned from one such visit, Osinachi met him at the doorway and saw at once that his face had changed. "What did they say?" she asked quietly. Obina hesitated, then answered with painful honesty. "They said the problem is coming from your mother's side." Osinachi stared at him as if the words were impossible. "My mother's side? What does that even mean?" Obina shook his head with frustration. "I do not know, but that is what I keep hearing." Osinachi's eyes filled with tears. "Do you believe it?" He did not answer immediately, and that silence itself wounded her. "I do not want to believe anything against you, but I cannot close my eyes when everything is dying around me." The wound those words opened between them did not heal quickly. Osinachi began to cry often in secret. She was still adjusting to motherhood, still physically recovering from childbirth, and now fear had entered the center of her marriage. Adama, seeing all this, became uneasy in a way that was deeper than concern for her daughter. Somewhere in the back of her soul, something began to stir with recognition. It was not yet full understanding. It was more like a cold hand touching the door of a memory she did not want opened. When her period of staying with Osinachi ended, she returned to Amaokwe, but she did not leave peace behind her. Obina's troubles continued even after she went back. What had started as setbacks became a long season of collapse. He sold another piece of land, then another. His farms did not recover. Deals slipped through his fingers. Relatives became more forceful in their advice. Some now told him openly, "Send the woman back to her father's house. This thing is following her." Obina resisted them because he loved Osinachi and could see her pain clearly. But their words fell into a mind already burdened by fear, and the strain in the marriage became heavy. At the same time, Adama herself began to fail in body and mind. One morning in Amaokwe, she rose to begin her walk, but before long she felt a strange weakness sweep through her. She sat down suddenly, pressing her hand to her chest. Uche, seeing her, asked, "What is it?" She shook her head and said, "I do not know." As the day continued, she became worse. Some days after that, she seemed almost normal for a while and then would suddenly go still, staring into space as if listening to voices no one else could hear. On certain nights, she would wake sweating and breathing hard. On other days, she barely had the strength to rise from her mat. Uche began to fear for her genuinely. He brought herbs, he called women who knew home remedies. He sent for men known for healing knowledge. Some gave mixtures, some prayed over her, some prescribed leaves, roots, and special preparations. nothing changed in a lasting way. She would look slightly better, then sink again. The sickness became a thing that sat in the center of the house like an uninvited spirit. Uche, though troubled by many things in his wife over the years, could not bear to watch her fade without help. He moved from place to place seeking a cure. He spent what he could. He listened to instructions. He obeyed advice. Yet, the more he searched, the less ordinary the sickness seemed. At times, Adama herself would clutch his hand with terror in her eyes and whisper, "It is coming for me." Uche would ask, "What is coming? What are you talking about?" But she would only shake her head and begin to cry. Then, on another day, she would say, "Nothing is wrong. I am only tired." Her mind seemed to move between fear, denial, and some deeper knowledge she refused to name. One afternoon, after many failed efforts, Uche took her to an older healer known for patience and discernment. This man did not rush. He asked questions slowly, watched Adama for a long time, checked her body in the way he knew, then sat back and remained quiet. Uche, anxious and exhausted, asked, "What is it? Tell me what is wrong with her. We have gone to many people and no one has helped us." The old healer looked at Adama first, not at Uche. Then he said, "This woman's sickness did not begin in the body." Uche frowned. "What does that mean?" The old man answered calmly, "There is a hidden sin standing inside this house. It is not small. It is not recent in the way the body counts time, but it is alive. It is striking her. It is touching her children. It is touching her son-in-law. If it is not brought into the open, it will continue. If it remains hidden, it will not end with her. It will move from one life to another." Uche stared at him. "What hidden sin? I know nothing of what you are saying." The old man pointed gently towards Adama, whose face had already become pale. "She knows." Uche turned to his wife sharply. "What is he talking about?" Adama began to tremble. "I do not know," she whispered. The healer did not raise his voice, but his words cut through the room. "Do not lie to save yourself. Lying is what deepens this kind of sickness. The thing you have done is asking for a mouth. If you do not give it one by confession, it will open its own mouth through destruction." Uche felt cold all over. "Are you saying someone did this to her?" The healer shook his head. "No, I am saying she did something and it has returned." Then he looked at Adama again and said, "The road to healing does not begin with herbs. It begins with truth. Speak before the grave takes your voice." On the journey back home, Uche kept asking questions, but Adama said almost nothing. Once they entered the compound, he closed the door of the hut and stood before her. "What is it?" he demanded. "What do you know that I do not know? Why did that man speak to you like that?" Adama began to cry, but still the words did not come. "Tell me!" Uche shouted, more frightened now than angry. "What have you done?" She only shook her head and covered her face. From that day, fear settled over the household in a new way. Uche no longer looked at his wife only with concern. He looked at her with dread. Chisom, who still lived in the family home, watched in confusion as whispers rose around her. Osinachi, already broken by the collapse in her marriage, was sent for and told that her mother's condition had worsened. She came quickly, carrying both worry and exhaustion in her body. When she arrived and saw Adama lying weak and shaking, she knelt beside her and said, "Mother, what is happening? Why are things like this?" Adama looked at her daughter and wept. There was so much terror in her face that Osinachi's own heart began to race. "Say something," she pleaded. "Please, say something." Uche stood nearby like a man standing inside smoke, unable to see his way. "The old healer said she knows what is wrong," he said bitterly, "but she will not speak." Osinachi turned back to her mother. "Mother, if there is anything, tell us. Is this about me? Is it about my husband? Is it about the things happening in my home?" At those words, Adama gave a long, broken cry and turned her face away. More days passed, but the pressure only grew. Her sickness worsened. At times, it seemed as if her body was collapsing from within. At other times, she would stare beyond those around her with eyes full of dread, as if seeing memory itself standing at the edge of the room. She stopped sleeping well. She muttered in fear. She would sometimes clutch her chest and say, "It burns." Uche no longer knew whether to comfort her or fear what sat behind her silence. In the end, Adama herself asked that everyone be gathered. Her voice was weak, but the urgency in it was unmistakable. "Call them," she said. "Call Osinachi. Call Chisom. Let Obina come too. I must speak." Uche hesitated, then obeyed. Word was sent, and before long, the family was gathered in that troubled house. Uche, tense and worn. Osinachi, anxious and pale. Chisom, frightened and confused. And Obina, whose face carried the strain of a man whose life had been collapsing without answer. They sat around Adama, who lay propped up, breathing with effort. No one spoke at first. The room felt full of waiting. At last, Uche said, "You asked us to come. Speak now." Adama tried, but no words came. Tears rolled from her eyes instead. Osinachi moved closer and took her hand. "Mother, whatever it is, say it. This silence is killing us." Chisom began to cry softly. "Mama, what happened?" Obina remained still, but inside him, tension had already tightened like rope. He had gone to too many places, heard too many warnings, and watched too much loss to take this moment lightly. Adama opened her mouth again, then closed it, struggling as though the force holding her shut were heavy enough to crush her on its way out. Uche's patience finally broke. "Is this same thing that is destroying my household?" Obina asked suddenly, his voice low but sharp. "Is this same thing that has turned my life upside down?" The question seemed to strike Adama with fresh terror. She began shaking. "I did not know," she whispered weakly. "I did not know it would reach this far." Uche stepped forward. "What did you not know? Speak." At last, as if the force holding her shut had cracked, Adama spoke in a broken rush. "It was me." Everyone stared at her. She continued through tears and failing breath. "I killed her. I killed my sister. I killed Olaedo." The room froze. For a moment, even the air seemed to stop moving. Osinachi's fingers slipped from her mother's hand. Chisom gasped aloud. Uche looked at his wife with a face emptied of all softness. "You murdered your own sister," he said, each word sounding heavier than the last. "The same woman who carried your shame, the same woman who raised your child." Adama kept crying. "I was blind. I was foolish. I thought when she was gone, Ifechukwu would become mine again. I thought he would turn fully to me. But he never did. He never did. And now everything is breaking." Obina, who had remained silent through most of the confession, finally spoke, and his voice carried pain mixed with terrible clarity. "So this is it," he said. "This is the blood chasing my house. This is the evil that followed my wife. This is why every door closed after your foot entered my home." Osinachi turned toward him with tears pouring down her face. "I did not know," I cried. "I swear to you, I did not know." Obina looked at her with anguish, and for once, he could no longer hide how shaken he was. "I know you did not know," he said, "but now I know what has been standing over my life." Uche sank onto his stool like a man whose strength had suddenly failed. He put both hands on his head and said in a broken voice, "What kind of woman did I live with all these years without knowing?" Adama tried to reach toward him weakly. "Forgive me," she whispered. Uche drew back as if her hand had become fire. "Forgive you? Did Olaedo rise to ask for forgiveness before you killed her? Did you think of your children? Did you think of me? Did you think of the innocent woman who carried your burden and paid you back with love?" His voice rose with grief and fury until it shook the room. Chisom, crying uncontrollably now, knelt on the floor and kept saying, "Mother, why? Why would you do such a thing?" But Adama had no answer left except tears, regret, and a body already collapsing under the weight of what she had hidden too long. She looked from one face to another, as if only now understanding the full ruin she had made. "It was jealousy," she said. "It was jealousy. It entered me and I let it grow. I thought if she was dead, peace would come. I thought I would finally have what I wanted. But from that day, there has been no peace. None." She began breathing harder. Her chest rose and fell with struggle. Osinachi, though horrified, moved toward her again instinctively because pain was still pain, and the dying woman was still her mother. "Mother," said Chisom through tears, "hold on." But Adama's eyes had already begun to look beyond them. Fear returned to her face, raw and childish now. "Do not let it take me like this," she whispered. No one knew what to say. Uche sat rigid, unable to move toward her. Chisom trembled beside the wall. Obina stood like a man caught between pity and revulsion. Osinati held her mother's arm and cried openly. Adama tried once more to speak, perhaps to say more, perhaps to beg more, but the strength was leaving her quickly. A choking sound rose in her throat. Her body jerked weakly, and then, before the stunned family gathered around her could do anything, Adama died, leaving the room filled with silence so terrible that no one present would ever forget it. The silence that followed Adama's death was heavier than crying. It sat in the room like a living thing, pressing on the chests of everyone present and making even breathing feel difficult. Uche remained frozen on the stool where he had fallen, his eyes fixed on the still body of the woman he had lived with for years without knowing the darkness she had hidden. Osinachi knelt beside her mother, shaking and weeping, not only because death had just taken place before her eyes, but because the truth that came before that death had torn her whole life open. Chisom cried from the corner of the room, her body trembling with shock, confusion, shame, and grief all mixed together. Obina stood still for a long time, saying nothing, but his face had changed deeply. The burden that had been crushing his house now had a name, and that name was hidden blood. No one spoke for some time because words seemed too small for the weight of what had just happened. At last, Uche rose slowly and said in a voice that sounded hollow, "She is gone." Those simple words broke something again in the room, and the women nearby who had heard the cries earlier entered and began to wail. But even as mourning began, everyone present knew that this was not an ordinary death and not an ordinary house of sorrow. A confession had opened something that could not be closed again. By the next morning, the first whispers had already begun moving beyond the compound in Amaukwe. People did not know every detail yet, but they knew something terrible had happened. They knew Adama had died after speaking of old evil. They knew the family was sitting inside a shame too deep to hide. Uche did not have the strength to answer many questions, and for a while, he sent people away. But silence cannot hold back truth forever, especially when that truth has already torn through too many lives. Adama was buried quietly because there was no joy around her death and no honor in the way she had gone. There were no songs of praise resting on her name, no proud storytelling, no peace in the family faces gathered around the burial. Even those who came out of duty did so with heavy minds, sensing that a curse had been exposed but not yet cleansed. Osinachi moved through those burial days like a woman carrying stones inside her body. Chisom was hardly better. There were daughters grieving their mother, yet there were also daughters whose mother had murdered the innocent woman their brother loved as his only mother. Grief would not let them rest, but shame would not let them cry freely either. Obina stayed near her wife, not because all the pain had suddenly disappeared, but because in the middle of everything, he could still see that she too was a wounded person standing inside the ruins of a sin she did not commit. Yet, even with that understanding, the fear in him remained. He had seen too much loss to pretend that confession alone had ended the matter. A few days after the burial, Osinachi knew there was one task she could no longer avoid, no matter how terrible it would be. Ifechukwu had to be told the truth fully. He had to know not only that Adama was dead, but also what she had confessed before dying. The thought of going to him frightened him deeply. Since childhood, he had always been a figure larger than ordinary family ties, a man blessed with success, discipline, and the deep dignity that came from the way he had been raised. Even before this truth, there had always been some distance between him and Adama's household. Now, she was going to stand before him carrying the confession that his mother had been murdered by the woman who gave birth to him. Still, there was no other path. She left for Obinagu with fear in her heart and tears near the surface of her eyes. When she arrived at Obinagu and he saw her, he was immediately surprised. He knew from her face that something was wrong. "Osinachi," he said, stepping forward, "why are you here like this? What has happened?" She opened her mouth, but the words did not come easily. He led her inside and asked again, more firmly this time, "Speak, what is it?" Her eyes filled. "Our mother is dead," she said. Ifechukwu went still. He did not ask how. He did not ask when. He only looked at her for a long moment and then said slowly, "And that is not all." Osinachi began to cry. "No," she whispered, "that is not all." Something in Ifechukwu's face changed at once. "What are you trying to say?" She struggled through sobs to tell him. She told him how their mother fell into strange sickness. She told him of the healer who said a hidden sin was destroying the family. She told him how they had all gathered and how Adama, with her last strength, confessed before them that jealousy had pushed her into evil, that she had gone to the Dibia in Omunachi, that she had carried poisoned food to Olaedo, and that she was responsible for the death of the woman he called mother. Before she even finished, Ifechukwu had stepped back as if the ground itself had turned against him. "No," He said, "No." His voice rose in pain. "No!" Osinachi cried harder. "It is true. Father heard it. Chisom heard it. Obina heard it. We all heard it before she died." Ifechukwu turned away and pressed both hands against his head. His chest rose and fell heavily, as if he could not breathe with the truth inside the room. For years, he had lived with grief over Olaedo's mysterious death. For years, he had carried sorrow without knowing that human hands, and not only fate, had taken her from him. And now, the hand behind that death was the hand of the woman who gave birth to him. The cruelty of it struck him so deeply that for some moments, anger and grief became one thing inside him. He turned back and his eyes were wet but hard. "So, she killed her," he said, "the woman who raised me, the woman who carried me, the woman who gave up her life for me. She killed her." Osinachi bowed her head and cried. "I am ashamed," she said. "I am ashamed to stand before you with this." Ifechukwu's voice shook with pain. "Do not come here hoping that because she is dead, I will now begin to speak softly about her. Do not come here hoping I will call her my mother. The only mother I have ever known is Olaedo. The only mother whose hands I remember over my sickness, my hunger, my childhood, my life is Olaedo. Nothing will make me give that place to the woman who murdered her." Osinachi did not defend Adama. There was nothing left to defend. She only knelt and said, I know. I came because truth must not hide anymore." He looked at her for a long time, the anger in him still burning, and then said in a lower voice, "Go back. Tell them I have heard. Tell them this matter will not be buried under shame and silence." Osinachi understood at once that he meant more than grief. He meant judgment. She returned home carrying not comfort, but the certainty that the hidden crime was now fully awake. When word reached Umueze that Ifechukwu knew the truth and that the matter would no longer remain private, the elders of the village began to speak with one mind. Many of them had loved and respected Olaedo deeply. They remembered the years of sacrifice no one could deny. They remembered how she had raised another woman's child without bitterness, how she had lost her youth in that duty, and how she finally died suddenly while still carrying kindness in her hands. Now that the truth had been spoken aloud, they refused to let her memory remain under the shadow of an unexplained death. "This is not something to whisper over and then forget," one elder said during an early gathering. "An innocent woman was murdered." Another added, "Not just any woman, a woman who carried another person's burden in love." Soon, the matter grew beyond one family's private disgrace. It became a wound before both Umueze and Amaokwe. Ifechukwu returned from Obinago with a face and bearing that told everyone he was not coming only as a grieving son. He was coming as a man demanding truth and honor for the dead. He greeted the elders properly, but his voice was steady and cold when he said, "My mother did not die an ordinary death. She was murdered. The land must hear it, the people must hear it. Her name must not remain inside mystery while those who caused her death hide inside the grave or behind friendship." The elders agreed, and a full village council was called. The square in Umueze filled on the chosen day. Men came with serious faces. Women gathered in clusters, whispering with grief and anger. Relatives from both villages arrived. Even those who would normally avoid such heavy matters came because the story had spread far enough that everyone knew something terrible would be laid bare. Ifechukwu stood before them dressed with dignity, but his mourning was in his eyes. Uche came too, carrying a shame that bent his shoulders. Osinachi and Chisom came covered in sorrow, unable to lift their heads fully before the crowd. Obina stood near them, not as a man free from pain, but as one who had seen how hidden evil could invade innocent homes. When the elders were seated and the gathering had settled, the oldest among them said, "Today, we are not here for noise. We are here because truth has spoken from death and truth must now stand before the living." Then he turned to Ifechukwu and said, "Speak your heart." Ifechuku stepped forward. For a brief moment, he looked across the people gathered there, and then he began, not with anger first, but with pain. He spoke of Olaedo's life. He spoke of her kindness, her sacrifice, the years she spent raising him, the home she gave him, the discipline she planted in him, the love she poured into him, and the dignity with which she lived. His voice shook at times, but he did not stop. I buried her thinking heaven alone had called her. I buried her not knowing that the hand which should have blessed her instead had fed her death. I buried my mother in ignorance, but I stand here today in truth. She was murdered. She was murdered by the woman who gave birth to me, and that truth is too heavy to hide. A deep murmur moved through the square. The elder then called for witnesses to speak. Uche stepped forward first. He looked like a man whose own soul had been cut open by what he had learned. I heard it with my own ears, he said quietly. She was sick. We searched for help. The healer said a hidden sin was destroying us. When the family gathered, she confessed. She said jealousy drove her. She said she went to the dibia in Umunachi. She said she prepared food and gave it to Olaedo. She said that was how my wife's sister died. His voice broke on the last sentence and he stepped back trembling. Osinachi was called next. Fear and shame moved all over her, but she spoke. She repeated her mother's words as best as she could, weeping openly as she did. Chisom confirmed the same. Obina then stood and said, I did not know these things before that day, but I know what followed us. I know what entered my home after her visit. I know the warnings I heard again and again that a hidden evil from my wife's mother's side was chasing us. When the confession came, many dark things became clear. The square grew heavier with each testimony, but one part of the chain still remained outside full public truth. Ugo had not yet spoken. Her name had already been mentioned in Adama's confession before the family, and it was known that she had fed the bitterness that eventually became murder. So the elders sent for her. When she was brought before the council, she came with false humility and trembling lips. At first, she denied any serious role. I only spoke as a friend, she said. I did not force anyone to do evil. But the elders were not moved by half-truth. One of them struck his staff on the ground and said, Do not insult this gathering. Your name has been called by the dead and by the living. Speak truth. Ugo tried again to reduce herself. I did not know it would go so far. Ifechuku's eyes flashed at that. You told her my mother had taken what belonged to her. You fed that poison for years. You pointed her toward the road of darkness. Ugo began to cry. Still, the elders pressed harder. Did you or did you not direct her to Umunachi? One asked. Ugo looked around at the faces full of judgment and knew the walls around her lies were breaking. Her body sagged. Yes, she whispered. Speak louder, the elder commanded. Yes, she said again, louder now, tears running down her face. I told her where to go. I told her about the dibia. I kept telling her that Olaedo had taken her place. I did not put the poison in the food with my own hand, but I knew the road I was opening. A wave of horror passed through the square. Women shook their heads. Men muttered in anger. The elder's face hardened. So your mouth became a knife. Ugo fell to her knees. Forgive me, she cried. But the people were not ready to hear that word easily. The truth had now fully exploded in the village square. It was no longer rumor. It was no longer a deathbed whisper. It was a public unveiling of greed, envy, and wicked influence. Ifechuku was then asked if he had anything more to say. And when he stepped forward again, the square went quiet. What he said that day remained in the mouths of people for many years. He looked at the elders, at both clans, at the women and men gathered, and he spoke not only as a wounded son, but as a man defending the meaning of love and motherhood itself. Let all who are here hear me clearly, he said. A child is not owned only by the womb that carried him. If that was so, then the earth would be full of mothers but empty of love. The woman who raises a child, who feeds him, who stays awake in his sickness, who loses sleep for him, who gives her years for him, who protects him, corrects him, prays for him, and stands between him and the hardness of life. That woman is a mother in the deepest way. Olaedo was my mother. She was my mother when I cried. She was my mother when I was hungry. She was my mother when I was small. She was my mother when I became a man. She was my mother when I had nothing, and she remained my mother when I had something. No blood confession, no death, and no shame will take that truth away from her. By the time he finished, many people were already crying openly. Even some elders lowered their heads in grief. It was not only what he said, but the truth living inside the words. The square had become a place where the dignity stolen from Olaedo in death was now being restored before all people. Judgment was then pronounced. Ugo was publicly disgraced. Her role in feeding envy and directing another woman toward murder was declared before both villages, and she was stripped of whatever false respect she still carried. The path to Dibian Wari in Umunachi was condemned openly, and messengers were sent so that the elders there would know that evil had grown through his work. The elders in Umueze ordered cleansing rites, not to entertain fear, but to cut off the blood shadow hanging over the families. The land had to be spoken to. The graves had to be honored rightly. The innocent had to be separated from the guilt they did not choose. But beyond punishment and cleansing, Ifechukwu chose a greater answer. When some expected him to pour all his energy into revenge, he instead said, "Evil has already taken enough. I will not let my mother's memory stand only beside sorrow. It must stand beside life." And so he announced before the gathering that in Olaedo's name, he would build a large trading shelter in Umueze, a place where widows, abandoned women, poor mothers, and women struggling to survive could trade in dignity without being pushed aside. He also declared that he would set apart land whose annual harvest would forever be used to feed motherless children and support those left helpless by life. The Kipu were moved again, because in that moment, he was not only honoring the woman who raised him, he was making her goodness continue beyond the grave. Work began not long after. Builders came, the shelter rose. It stood broad and strong, and when people passed it, they spoke Olaedo's name with fresh respect. The land dedicated in her memory also began to yield, and each harvest season, food from it was set aside exactly as Ifechukwu had promised. In this way, kindness answered cruelty, and memory answered murder. Meanwhile, Osinachi and Chisom carried their shame daily. They did not defend their mother's sin, yet they could not escape the stain it cast over their own lives. At last, humbled beyond pride, they went to Ifechukwu together. They found him one evening after he had returned from overseeing work connected to the shelter. The moment they saw him, both sisters fell to their knees. Osinachi spoke first through tears. "We do not deserve to stand before you, but we are begging for mercy." Chisom cried beside her and added, "We are ashamed of what our mother did. We are ashamed of every bitter word we ever allowed into our own hearts. Please do not cast us away forever." Ifechukwu stood looking at them for a long time. Their faces were full of remorse, and for a moment he saw not only the daughters of Adama, but also two women wounded by a sin they had inherited in consequence, not in choice. His voice, when it came, was still heavy with pain. "Forgiveness is not something spoken lightly," he said. "My mother is still gone." Both sisters bowed lower. "We know," Osinachi whispered. He continued, "But I also know that if I let bitterness rule me forever, then the same evil that destroyed your mother will begin to eat me from another side. I will not call wrong right. I will not pretend nothing happened. But if your repentance is true, then rise and live differently." The sisters wept harder, not because everything had been repaired in a moment, but because he had not shut the door completely against them. That small mercy became the first true opening toward peace. In Obina's house, healing also began slowly. It did not happen in one sudden day, But over time, the choking weight that had pressed on his work started to lift. One business opportunity that had long seemed dead opened again. A farm season that should have failed gave better fruit than expected. Trusted people began returning. Loss did not vanish overnight, but the long chain of collapse was broken. Obinna watched this carefully and knew the difference. He also watched his wife, who had changed deeply through everything. Osinachi became quieter, humbler, and more prayerful. She no longer moved through life with ease. She moved through it with the seriousness of one who had looked over the edge of ruin and seen how quickly hidden evil could swallow innocent homes. One evening, as they sat together after their child had slept, Obinna said softly, "I was angry. I was afraid. There were days I thought I would lose everything." Osinachi lowered her eyes and answered, "I know." He reached for her hand and said, "But you are not your mother's sin." At those words, she broke into tears because they were the words she had feared she might never hear. Their marriage, shaken but not destroyed, began to mend. In time, laughter returned to their house, first in little moments, then in fuller ones. Chisom too changed. She stopped moving with careless pride and began to live with greater caution and humility. Uche, though he carried wounds of betrayal that could never be fully erased, also found a kind of sober peace in the fact that truth had finally been spoken before the land. He lived the rest of his days with less noise in his home, but more sadness in his heart, a man who had learned too late the depth of what had been sleeping beside him. As for Ifechukwu, life did not stop at justice. The years moved on, and those close to him began once more to encourage him to marry. At first he resisted because grief had carved such deep space inside him. But eventually he met a humble woman of good character, a woman whose gentleness, wisdom, and quiet strength reminded him that not all goodness had died from the world. He watched her carefully over time and saw that she was not loud, not proud, and not greedy. She knew how to honor people, how to work, and how to speak with respect. When he chose her, the elders approved gladly. Their wedding became a joyful event, not because sorrow had been forgotten, but because life had finally made room again for blessing. During the celebration, there was one place in particular that drew people's attention, the place set aside in honor of Olaedo's memory. Her name was spoken with reverence. Her story was remembered. Her goodness was not hidden behind the shame of how she died. Instead, it stood brighter because truth had fought its way back into the open. When Ifechukwu stood beside his wife and looked upon the gathered people, he knew that though evil had once cut his life deeply, it had not won the final word. The final word belonged to truth, to honor, to mercy, and to the memory of a woman who loved beyond duty. And so, the story of Umwete came to rest on a lesson the old and the young would repeat for many years, that jealousy may kill the body, but it cannot bury the truth forever. Hidden wickedness may walk proudly for a season, but one day it will kneel before judgment, and the dignity of the righteous, even when stolen in secret, will rise again before men, before the land, and before God. The lesson in this story is that jealousy, greed, and ingratitude can push a person to destroy the very hand that once helped them. But no matter how long evil hides in secret, truth will surely come out. Wickedness will bring painful consequences, and in the end, genuine love, sacrifice, and righteousness will always be honored. Thanks for watching this amazing story on African Stories by V. If you liked it and felt inspired, please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing with your friends, and leaving a comment below. To see more interesting stories and learn about different cultures, subscribe to African Stories by V, and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more stories to you. Until we meet again, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep smiling.